My name is Claire Whitman. I'm a 31-year-old healthcare consultant living in Chicago, and 3 weeks before my wedding, I called the entire thing off. I want to tell you exactly how it happened, every detail, every moment, because I think there are women out there sitting where I was sitting, hearing the same warnings I heard and explaining them away the same way I was explaining them away. I don't want you to do that. I want you to hear my story all the way through. The night everything began, the scent of fresh-cut white roses and expensive vanilla candles filled the private dining room at Harrington's, one of Chicago's most respected old-school restaurants, the kind of place where the waiters wear black ties and the wine list is bound in leather. My future mother-in-law, a woman named Margaret, had insisted on hosting our engagement dinner there, and I remember thinking how impossibly beautiful those white roses looked arranged in tall crystal vases down the center of every table, how the soft golden light spilling from the antique chandeliers made every face glow, made every glass of champagne sparkle like something out of a fairy tale. 60 people we loved had gathered around tables draped in heavy ivory linen. The room smelled like flowers and butter and money. I was wearing the navy silk dress my best friend Lauren had helped me pick out at a boutique in Wicker Park, the one with the deep neckline and the small cap sleeves, the one that made me feel both confident and elegant, like a woman who knew exactly who she was and exactly where she was going. My fiancé, who I'll call Daniel, squeezed my hand under the table and smiled at me with that quiet, proud smile he saved for me, and I remember thinking almost out loud, this is it. This is the beginning of everything I've worked for. I was 31 years old that night. I had spent the last 8 years building my career as a healthcare consultant, traveling to hospital systems all across the Midwest, presenting in boardrooms full of executives twice my age, saving carefully, investing carefully, watching every dollar I earned with the kind of attention most people reserve for their children. I owned a one-bedroom condo in Lincoln Park with floor-ceiling windows that I had purchased entirely on my own at the age of 28. No co-signer, no help from my parents, no shortcuts. I had a maxed-out 401k, a healthy emergency fund, and a Roth IRA I had been quietly funneling money into since I was 23. My mother used to laugh and say I was the most organized person she had ever met, that I had been balancing my own checkbook since middle school. I wasn't reckless with anything, not my money, not my time, and not my heart, not ever. I had been with Daniel for 2.5 years by that point. We had met at a mutual friend's rooftop party on the 4th of July. And I remember the exact moment I noticed him, because the fireworks had just started and everyone else was looking up at the sky and he was looking at me. He was smart in a way that made me feel sharp instead of small. He was funny in that dry, observational way I had always loved. He worked in commercial real estate, came from a tight-knit family in the western suburbs, and seemed genuinely proud of my ambitions in a way that I had not encountered often with men I dated. He came as a package deal with his parents, Margaret and Robert, and his younger sister, Vanessa, who was 26 and worked in marketing. I knew they were close. I respected that closeness. I came from a small family myself, and I had always told Daniel that I admired the way the four of them seemed to genuinely enjoy each other's company at Sunday dinners, holidays, birthdays. What I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have known yet, was exactly what that closeness was going to mean. For me, the dinner began the way every engagement dinner is supposed to begin. The champagne arrived in silver buckets. Toasts started gently, naturally. Lauren stood up first and told the room a story about how I had once stayed up all night helping her finish a law school paper even though I had a flight to catch at 6 in the morning. And Daniel's college roommate told a story about how Daniel had once tried to cook me a romantic dinner and set off the smoke detector so badly the entire apartment building had to evacuate onto the sidewalk in their pajamas. The room laughed. I laughed. Daniel's father, Robert, stood up and gave a genuinely lovely speech about love and commitment, about how marriage was a daily choice rather than a single decision, and Margaret dabbed her eyes with a folded handkerchief that looked like it had been ironed that afternoon. I felt warm. I felt welcomed. I felt seen, and then Vanessa stood up. I remember watching her rise from her chair and thinking she looked unusually polished even for her. The kind of polish that takes hours and a stylist. She was confident in the way people are confident when they have never once in their lives been told no, and she had brought a small ivory clutch with her to the table that did not quite match the rest of her outfit. She clinked her glass 3 times with her butter knife, a clear ringing sound that silenced the room. She smiled at us, and her smile was the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes. The kind that pulls slightly at the corners but leaves the rest of the face strangely still. She said she wanted to share something special. She said it was a little tradition in their family. She said it was their way of honoring what it meant to truly join them. I remember the exact moment the warmth left the room for me. It happened in stages, the way the temperature drops before a storm. I felt it first in my fingertips where I had been holding the stem of my wine glass loosely, then in my shoulders, then somewhere deep in my chest, where my breath had been moving easy a moment before. She reached into the ivory clutch and pulled out what looked like a folded note card, an actual handwritten note card, cream-colored, bordered, like she was about to read a wedding program. And then in a voice as clear and polite as a corporate orientation speech, she began to explain my future to a room of 60 people. She said that in their family, the women took care of the home. She said it the way you would say in our family we open presents on Christmas Eve, like it was a beloved tradition rather than an instruction. She said that Sunday dinners would be at the family house, and as the new wife I would be expected to help prepare and serve. She used those exact words, help prepare and serve. She said their mother's recipe books, 3 of them kept in a glass cabinet in the kitchen, would be passed to me, and I would be responsible for continuing those traditions. She said, and this is the line I will never forget as long as I live, that family finances, meaning the household budget for Daniel and me as a married couple, would be reviewed monthly by his mother to make sure we were building correctly. Building correctly. As if my life was a piece of furniture from IKEA and Margaret was the assembly inspector. The table went quiet, not a small quiet, a complete quiet. 60 people, a quiet so total that I could hear the ice settling in the silver champagne buckets across the room. Lauren turned and looked at me. My mother turned and looked at me. Even Daniel's father, Robert, who had just spoken so beautifully about love being a daily choice, suddenly seemed very interested in the bread basket. I looked at Daniel. He was looking at his plate. He was looking at his plate the way a man looks at his plate when he has known his whole life that this moment was coming and has decided, somewhere along the way, to let it happen to me without warning me. He did not look up. He did not reach for my hand again. He did not push his chair back, stand up, and put a stop to it. He just stared at the small swirl of olive oil on his bread plate, as if it contained the answer to a math problem he had been failing for years. I looked at his mother. Margaret was nodding slightly, a small, satisfied smile on her face, the way you smile when a child finally recites the prayer correctly at the dinner table. This was the most natural thing in the world to her. This was, I realized with a slow, cold certainty, something they had discussed. I took a breath. I let it sit in my chest until I felt steady. And then I did the thing I have learned over and over again in my career. It's the most powerful thing a woman can do when she is blindsided in public. I refused to perform the reaction they were waiting for. I kept my voice calm. I kept it warm even. I tilted my head slightly and I smiled at Vanessa and I said, that's interesting. Can I ask, are these formal family requirements or more like personal preferences? Vanessa blinked at me. She actually blinked like she had not anticipated the question. She glanced quickly at her mother, then back at me, and she said, oh, they're expectations, cherished ones. I nodded slowly, as if she had just told me something fascinating about a hobby of hers. I said, and the monthly financial review with your mother, is that something Daniel agreed to? Her smile flickered just for a second. She said, it's how our family has always done things. I said, I see. And then I picked up my wine glass and I took a sip, slow, deliberate, and I smiled at the entire table and I said in the warmest voice I had, that it had been a wonderful evening. I turned to Margaret and Robert and I thanked them sincerely for their generosity in hosting such a beautiful dinner. I asked Margaret about the flowers. I asked Robert about the wine. I was gracious. I was warm. I gave nothing away. But inside, somewhere very deep, something had shifted in a way I could not undo. A small door had closed in a hallway I had not known existed, and once I felt it close, I could not unfeel it. Later that night, in the back of the car Daniel had ordered to take us home, I waited for him to say something. I waited the entire 40-minute drive back to my condo. I watched the city lights blur past the window and I waited. He said traffic was bad. He said the salmon had been a little overcooked. He said he was tired and that his back was hurting from the chair. He said everything except the one thing that mattered. We got upstairs. He kicked off his shoes. He poured himself a glass of water. And finally, with my coat still on and my keys still in my hand, I said, Daniel, are you going to talk about what happened tonight? He sighed, a long, weary sigh like I was the one being unreasonable. He said, Vanessa can be a lot sometimes. She means well. I said, Daniel, your sister announced in front of 60 people that your mother would be reviewing our finances every month. He said, it's just a tradition. It doesn't have to be a big deal, and there it was. The thing I will always remember. The first true crack, not his sister, not his mother, him, the man I had said yes to, the man I had imagined a life with. He was standing in my kitchen in his dress shoes, telling me that the public announcement of my future role as a household subordinate did not have to be a big deal. I did not argue, I did not raise my voice. I have learned in 8 years of consulting that an argument is a gift you give to people who want to keep you tangled up. I said good night. I went into my bathroom and I closed the door and I sat on the edge of the bathtub and I stared at the tile floor for 45 minutes without moving. The next morning, before Daniel was even awake, I took my phone out onto my balcony and I called Lauren. Lauren was my best friend, but Lauren was also a practicing family law attorney with a decade of experience, and the second she heard my voice, she knew. I told her everything. The dinner, the note card, the recipe books, the financial review. Daniel staring at his plate, the car ride home. That doesn't have to be a big deal. She listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. I I could hear her breathing slowly on the other end, and then she said very carefully, "Claire, don't sign anything, don't change anything in your financial accounts, and from this moment forward document everything." I said, "Lauren, you think this is that serious?" She said, "I think you should find out exactly what you're walking into before you walk into it." I took her advice. I took it the way I take advice from doctors, which is to say completely and without negotiation. Over the next 6 weeks I started paying attention in a different way, not a paranoid way, a clear way, the way a consultant reads a balance sheet, and I began to notice things that I had been unconsciously explaining away for 2.5 years. I noticed, for example, the way Margaret called every Sunday morning at exactly 9:45, and how those calls, which I had thought were sweet, almost always turned into 45-minute conversations where she asked very detailed, very specific questions about our weekend plans, our dinner reservations, our spending. What did you order at the restaurant? How much was the wine? Are you eating in or out tonight? Have you booked the painters yet? How much did the painters quote? I noticed the way Vanessa texted Daniel constantly all day every day, and how he would angle his phone slightly away from me when he responded, the way a teenager hides a bad grade. I noticed the way the three of them, Vanessa, Margaret, and Robert, had a family group chat that Daniel was in but I had never been added to despite being his fiancé, despite living with him on weekends, despite planning a wedding with him. I noticed the way when I had once mentioned in passing that Daniel and I were thinking about refinancing my Lincoln Park condo to pull equity for a joint investment property, Robert had immediately, almost reflexively, said we should meet with the family's financial guy first. The family's financial guy, not a financial guy, not even a family financial advisor. The family's financial guy, as if there was an office somewhere with a brass plaque on the door. I started writing things down, dates, conversations, specific quotes when I could remember them word for word, not because I was building a case, not yet. I was a consultant by training, and documentation was simply how I thought. It was how I sorted truth from noise. I kept the notes in a password-protected file on my personal laptop. I told no one but Lauren, and then came the conversation about the house. Daniel and I had been discussing buying a larger place together for several months. My condo was paid off, mine outright, no mortgage, purchased with cash savings and a small inheritance from my grandmother who had passed when I was 26. We had talked for a long time about selling it and rolling the proceeds into something bigger, something with a yard, room for kids someday, room for a dog. It was exciting. It felt like a real plan. It felt like the beginning of the next chapter. One Saturday afternoon in early fall, we drove up to Evanston to look at a property his agent had sent us. It was beautiful. Honestly, it stopped me in the doorway. 4 bedrooms, a renovated kitchen with white shaker cabinets and a marble island so big you could roll dough on it. A backyard with 2 enormous old oak trees that turned the late afternoon light into something soft and watery. The listing price was $680,000. I had done the math carefully on the way up. If I contributed the full proceeds from my condo sale, approximately $300,000 after fees, and Daniel contributed what he had been saving, approximately $60,000, I would be providing roughly 83% of the down payment. 83% out of my own savings, out of my grandmother's small inheritance, out of 8 years of disciplined work. I mentioned it on the drive back into the city. Casually, carefully, I said, "Hey, just so we're on the same page, I want to make sure we sit down soon and discuss how ownership would be structured, given the difference in contribution. Nothing dramatic, just clean." He was quiet for a beat too long, the kind of quiet that fills a car, and then he said, "My family thinks we should put it in both our names equally." I felt the road shift under us. I kept my voice neutral. I said, "Your family has been discussing our home purchase," he said. "They just want to make sure we're starting on equal footing. Dad has some concerns about one person having more leverage than the other." I said very, very carefully, "Daniel, I would be contributing over 80% of the purchase price." He said, "But we'd be building a life together. We'd be building a life together." The phrase landed like a soft slap. Building a life together while I built the equity. Building a life together while his name went on the deed at 50%. Building a life together while his father, who had not contributed a single dollar, sat at his dining room table in the suburbs deciding what was fair. I said nothing for the rest of the drive. He did not seem to notice. That night I called Lauren again. I told her about Evanston. I told her about the financial review tradition. I told her about the Sunday calls, the family group chat I wasn't in, the family's financial guy, all of it all at once. Everything I had been documenting for 6 weeks dumped onto her in one long, flat-voiced phone call. She was quiet for a longer time this time, long enough that I thought the call had dropped, and then she said something I have not been able to forget since. She said, "Claire, I need to ask you something directly. Do you want to marry him, or do you want to marry the version of him you thought he was?" I did not answer right away. I sat in my bedroom in my condo, on the bed I had bought with my own money 4 years earlier, and I stared at the ceiling. I stared at the small water stain in the corner that I had been meaning to affix since spring. I thought about that question for a long, long time. I thought about Daniel laughing on the rooftop on the 4th of July. I thought about Daniel watching his plate at Harrington's. I thought about Daniel saying, "We'd be building a life together." I said, "I don't know yet." She said, "Okay, then before you do anything else, before you sell anything, before you sign anything, before you say another word about Evanston, let's protect you." We spent the next 2 hours on the phone. She walked me through every step. Keep all assets in my name only. Do not move any money into any joint account until there was a clear, written legal agreement signed and reviewed. If we were going to buy property together, a cohabitation agreement and a prenuptial agreement needed to clearly outline contribution percentages and ownership stakes, and they needed to be signed before any escrow opened. She told me to keep my condo off the market for now. She told me to stop discussing financial specifics with his family. Not rudely, just neutrally, pleasantly, vaguely. We're still figuring it out. We haven't decided yet. We'll let you know when we do. And then near the end of the call, she said one more thing, almost as an afterthought. She said, Claire, start recording conversation, not to use against him, just so you have an accurate record of what is actually being said. Memory is unreliable under emotional stress, and you are about to be under a lot of emotional stress. Illinois is a one-party consent state. What she was suggesting was entirely legal. I downloaded a small voice recorder app onto my phone that night. I tested it once on a conversation with my mother about Thanksgiving, just to make sure it worked. I hoped genuinely with my whole heart that I would never need it for anything else. 3 weeks before the wedding, on a Tuesday afternoon, Margaret called me. Not to chat, not to plan. She had a purpose in her voice from the very first second, the kind of purpose that does not bother with small talk. I was sitting at my desk at work between meetings, and I tapped the recorder app the moment I saw her name on the screen. I do not know why, some instinct, some feeling in my gut. She said, Claire, sweetheart, I've been thinking. The family and I have been talking, and we feel it would be best if the Evanston house was purchased in Daniel's name only. I felt my stomach drop straight through the floor. I kept my voice perfectly level. I said, in Daniel's name only. She said, yes, to protect him. In case anything ever happened, you would of course have full access as his wife. We've spoken with a property attorney, a wonderful man, and this is the cleanest arrangement for everyone. I said, Margaret, I would be providing 83% of the down payment. There was a tiny pause, and then she said the sentence that ended everything. She said, and he'll be providing a lifetime of stability. I heard my own heartbeat in my ears, loud, slow, unmistakable, like a drum hit from another room. She had just told me in the softest possible voice that my financial contribution was a check and his financial contribution was his presence, that my life savings were a transaction and his marriage license was a gift. I said very carefully, I'll think about it, thank you for the call. I ended it. I put my phone down. I closed my laptop. I walked to the women's restroom on the 18th floor of my office building, and I locked myself in the handicap stall, and I pressed both hands against the cool tile wall, and I breathed for 10 full minutes. Then I went back to my desk. I opened the recorder app. I listened to the entire conversation back, twice, word for word, and I forwarded it to Lauren. Her response came back in 4 minutes. Do not sell your condo. Do not transfer any funds. Call me tomorrow morning at 8. I will clear my schedule. That was a Tuesday. On Wednesday, I was in her office on the 32nd floor of a downtown high-rise, sitting across from her in a leather chair, drinking coffee that had gone cold. On Thursday, I had a clear, complete, legal understanding of exactly what I was about to walk into. And on Friday, exactly 1 week before my rehearsal dinner, I made a decision. I had not fully decided to call off the wedding, not yet, but I had decided with absolute clarity that I would not be going into it blind. I would not be the woman in the navy dress smiling at the table while 60 people watched her future be announced like a prison sentence. I texted Daniel that afternoon and I asked him to meet me for dinner. Just the two of us. A small restaurant on the north side I had always liked, neutral ground, a place where I felt steady, a place where the lighting was good and the booths were quiet. I had my phone in the inner pocket of my jacket. The recorder was running. He arrived 10 minutes late and he seemed nervous from the moment he sat down. He kept fiddling with the menu. He ordered a whiskey before the waiter had even fully introduced himself. I waited. I let him settle. I let him drink half the whiskey, and then I said in my calmest, clearest, most consultant voice, Daniel, I need us to have an honest conversation about the house, about your family's involvement in our finances, and about what our marriage is actually going to look like in practice. He put his glass down. He said, Claire, my family just wants to help. I said, Daniel, I need to hear from you, not from your mother, not from your sister, not from your father, you. What do you expect my role in our home to look like? What does your mother's involvement in our finances look like in year 1, in year 5, in year 10? He shifted in the booth. He said, my mother would just give us guidance. I said, define guidance. He said, just, help us stay on track. Vanessa has experience with household management. I said, Vanessa is 26 and has never owned a home. He said, it's just the way things work in close families. I said, Daniel, does a close family need to review our bank statements monthly? He looked uncomfortable. He looked finally deeply uncomfortable. He said, it's not really reviewing, it's more like advising. And there it was again. The soft, slippery language, the redefining, reviewing isn't reviewing, expectations are preferences, 83% is equal footing, a monthly audit is just advising. I leaned forward. I said, Daniel, I want to be very clear with you and I want you to hear every word of this. I will not be putting my condo proceeds into a property that is in your name only. I will not have our finances reviewed, advised, or audited by your mother or anyone in your family without my explicit written agreement. I will not be the woman who serves Sunday dinner at your mother's house according to a recipe book I had no say in choosing. I need to know right now tonight if you understand that these are not negotiable points for me, or if your family's expectations are not negotiable for you. He was quiet for a long, long time, the kind of quiet that already answers the question before the words come. Finally, he picked up his whiskey, finished it, set the glass down, and he said very softly, "My family is important to me, Claire." I said, "I know, but Daniel, I need to know if I am more important." He looked away, he looked at the bar, he looked at the door, he looked anywhere except at me. He said, "That's not a fair question." That right there was the moment I knew. It was not a dramatic moment. There was no music, there were no tears. I did not slam down my fork or throw my engagement ring at him across the booth. I just felt something inside me settle. The way a building settles after years of small shifts in the foundation, not collapse. Settle. I said nothing. I paid my half of the bill. I drove home to my condo, my walls, my paid-off mortgage, my grandmother's small clock on the mantle, and I barely slept. At 4 in the morning, I sat at my kitchen table in the quiet, in the dark, in the soft hum of the refrigerator, and I did the thing I do whenever a decision feels too big to hold all at once. I made a list, 2 columns, black ink on a yellow legal pad. The first column was the things I had loved about Daniel, the way he laughed when something genuinely surprised him, the way he had once driven 3 hours in a snowstorm to bring me soup when I had the flu, the way he had been proud when I got promoted last year, genuinely proud, no edge of competition in his voice. The second column was the things I had ignored, the way he had never once stood up to his mother in 2.5 years, the way Vanessa was always CC'd on decisions that should have been ours, the way the Sunday calls were not warm but inventories, the way at Harrington's in front of 60 people when his sister had handed me my future on a note card. He had looked at his plate. The list was not close. The list was not even within shouting distance of close. I called Lauren at exactly 7 a.m. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "Lauren, I need to know how to unwind everything." She said, "Claire, are you sure?" I said, "I'm sure." What followed was the most methodical 2 weeks of my life. I have run hospital integration projects. I have managed 7-figure budgets. I have unwound mergers. None of it prepared me for the strange, surreal calm of unwinding a wedding, while still answering work emails and watching the rain hit my Lincoln Park windows. Lauren walked me through every single step. My condo had never been listed, so there was nothing to undo there. The joint savings account we had opened for wedding expenses had been funded with equal contributions, by my own quiet insistence months earlier, so splitting it was clean and straightforward. The vendors were harder. The venue, a beautiful historic ballroom downtown, kept 75% of the deposit. The caterer kept 50%. The photographer, who had been a friend of Lauren's, refunded everything except a small administrative fee and told me she was sorry and that she was proud of me, and I sat in my kitchen and cried for the first time when I read that email. Lauren helped me draft the cancellation letters. She reviewed each contract with me, line by line, in the evenings after her workday with a glass of wine in her hand and her highlighter in mine. She said almost nothing while we worked. She just sat next to me. She just stayed. I told Daniel by phone 2 days before what would have been the rehearsal dinner. I had drafted what I wanted to say on a note card, ironically enough, and I kept the conversation short and clear. I told him I had given this serious thought. I told him I could not enter a marriage where his family's authority over our life together was an assumed condition. I told him I wished him well, and I meant it. I still mean it. I do not hate him. I do not even resent him most days. He is, I think, exactly who he was raised to be, and I cannot blame him for that. I can only refuse to marry into it. He said very little on the call. He said, "Claire, please." He said, "Don't do this." He said, "We can talk about it." But there was something exhausted in his voice, almost relieved, the way someone sounds when a long, slow thing they have been dreading is finally happening. I think somewhere in him he knew. I think he had known for weeks. That night my phone showed 42 missed calls. His sister Vanessa, 8 times, his mother Margaret, 11 times, his father Robert, 3 times, his college roommate, twice, Daniel himself, 18 times. I did not answer a single one of them. I turned off my phone. I made a pot of chamomile tea in my favorite teal kettle. I put on an old gray sweater that had belonged to my grandmother. I walked into my living room. I sat on my couch, my quiet condo, my walls, my paid-off life. And I felt something I had genuinely not expected to feel. Relief, not the fragile kind, not the kind that sits on top of grief and might collapse at any moment. Real relief. The kind that comes from deep in your chest, the kind that feels like air returning to a room. The kind that comes from knowing with your whole body that you made the right call, even when it cost you something, and it did cost me something. I want to be honest about that. I had loved Daniel, or more accurately, I had loved who I thought I was choosing. I had imagined a specific life, a house with old oak trees, a kitchen with a marble island, children someday, holiday photos. I had imagined growing old next to him and laughing about the smoke detector story at our 40th anniversary. Letting go of that imagined life was not painless. It was not clean. It was not graceful. There were nights I cried in the shower so my neighbors wouldn't hear. There were mornings I woke up and forgot for a half-second that it was over, and the remembering hit me like a small, fresh wave. But here is what I have learned. Here is what I want to leave you with. If you have stayed with me this whole way, if you have watched this entire story and felt even a flicker of recognition, even a small, uncomfortable hum in your chest, the warning signs were there. They were there at the engagement dinner when Daniel looked at his plate instead of standing up for me. They were there in every Sunday phone call where Margaret asked questions a mother-in-law should not be asking. They were there in the family group chat I was never added to. They were there in the family's financial guide. They were there in the 83% and the equal footing and the lifetime of stability. They were there when the question of whose name went on the deed was not answered with logic or fairness or love, but with an old, quiet assumption that my contribution was a given and his authority was a right. Love is not a reason to abandon your own judgment. Love is not a reason to put your name on something that erases you. Love is not a reason to spend your grandmother's inheritance on a deed that does not include your name. Love is not a reason to hand the keys to your own life to a woman who will use them to take inventory every Sunday at 9:45 in the morning. The strongest thing I did was not calling off that wedding. People keep telling me that part was the strong part, and I let them say it, but it is not true. The strongest thing I did was the 2 weeks before it. When I sat in Lauren's office and I asked every single uncomfortable question and I listened, really listened to every answer, and I refused to let anyone, not Daniel, not Margaret, not Vanessa, not even my own hopeful, tired, in love brain make me feel dramatic for needing the truth. I moved forward. I kept my condo. I painted the bedroom a soft sage green that summer. 6 months after the cancellation, I got the promotion I had been working toward for 2 solid years. The one that came with a bigger team and a real seat at the executive table. Lauren and I still have dinner every other Tuesday at a small Italian